Yes? Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Marcos, you should eat your salad, because if you don't eat your salad, you're going to accuse us of never feeding you. That would not be good for the relationship. So it is really a great honor for me, for the Council of the Americas and the Americas Society, to host Marcos Peña, Chief of Staff to President Macri, for lunch today. Marcos, a very, very special welcome to you. I also want to give a special welcome to many other friends from Argentina that have joined us today. First, my dear friend, Ambassador Fernando Ortiz de Roa, Argentine Ambassador to the United States. Emilio Monzo, President of the Chamber of Deputies. Fulvio Pompeo, Fulvio, you're over here. Secretary of Strategic Affairs and a dear friend. Ambassador Martin Garcia Moritan, Permanent Representative to the United Nations, also a friend of the Council and are here often. And the new Consul General of Argentina in New York, Marcelo Justo. Marcelo, where are you? Right here. He's brand new, just arrived. And of course, Congressman Nicolas Massot. Now, frankly, Marcos needs no introduction, and you all have his bio. But I just want to make a couple of comments before I pass the microphone to him and to give him a second to eat. Marcos is more than just a chief of staff to President Macri. He has been at his side since the beginning of his career. And he is here today on the President's behalf to talk about Argentina and to provide insights and direction on the priorities of the administration. But I also want to say something about Argentina, frankly, from someone who has followed the country for longer than I would like to admit, because it might actually show my age. Frankly, I haven't seen, in all the years that I've worked with Argentina, I haven't seen a government stand up and confront the challenges in such a decisive way as President Macri and his team have done over the last month. It's this kind of leadership that they've exhibited that really making really tough decisions around interest rates, going to the IMF for support, but most of all, ensuring that Argentinians themselves understand the importance of the moment that they are living. And it is that gives me so much confidence that Argentina will succeed in the long term. So with that, Marcos, it is really a great pleasure to have you here. Marcos is going to give some remarks, and he's agreed to take some questions after the presentation. I want to remind you that his presentation is on the record, and we will have press, and that we're also webcasting his presentation. So welcome to everyone that is tuning in to the webcast. And remember, those of you that don't have time to tune in now, you will be able to see the presentation downloaded afterwards on our YouTube channel. So Marcos, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Well, good day to everybody. Thank you, Susan, for your kind words. Thank you for hosting this great lunch. We had the idea to come to visit a lot of friends here to tell them firsthand how we're seeing things in Argentina and to answer the questions as we always do and we always want to do. For me, it's very important to be here today because we think that together with the delegation, leaders of our team in Congress and part of our team, diplomatic team and government team, want to transmit the decision and the confidence of how we are seeing things in Argentina and in the world today in these challenging days. And I would like to say three ideas, and then so we can enter the questions. First, in terms of the economic part of the reality today of our country, the first thing is that we always thought our economic program as a road for economic stability, for growth, for reaching fiscal balance with growth and taking care of the most vulnerable sectors of our society, understanding that we were going through a narrow path between the confidence and the trust of the voters and the citizens of our country, and the confidence and the trust of the investors and the markets that had to finance our road towards our fiscal equilibrium and to our reducing our dependence of the external markets. We know that for a combination of reasons, local and external, in the past month, that path has gotten a little bit narrower and more slippery. And the first thing, as Susan said before, is that we registered very quickly the situation, and the President led decisions to adapt to that new level of confidence that we were in. And that's why we went especially to the IMF, and we are, we think, close and well advanced towards an agreement, a preventive agreement that can, as we say, bring us an umbrella at times where in the world we see rain in a lot of places and storms in other places. And also it will be something new for our country, because it's the first time in more than 30 agreements with the IMF that our government is not blaming the IMF or saying that the IMF is responsible for our problems. Argentina is responsible for its problems and for its solutions, and we welcome the help of the IMF as well as the support that markets have given us in all this time to help us reach the results that we need to reach. But understanding that it's our economic program, it's our decisions to be made, and it's our responsibility as a country to reduce our dependence and our vulnerability and start growing stronger. That, I think, is something that shows, as Susan said, the leadership of our president, that hasn't come here to think on how the short-term benefits or costs of a measure is done, but to really lead a change, a deep change that was born in Argentinians' minds and hearts in the past years that led us to where we are now. And I'll go back to that part in a second. We understand, as we said, that the basis of this agreement and the basis of what we need to do, as we said from the first day, is to accelerate our path to fiscal balance and also to strengthening the central bank's independence and the strength of its monetary policy. We understand also that we have to work on trying to adapt to the different situations we're facing since the devaluation, keeping in mind investors' trust and the possibility of trying not to modify the rules of the game and the rules that have brought us to this situation where we are, that have been 7 quarters of growth in our country, led mainly by investment. We understand also that it's very important, as a second matter, when we go to the politics of these economics that we can detail later. In the politics, we think there are 2 main aspects we have to look at, or we're looking at. First, the need to strengthen our capacities to build agreements, political agreements, with the opposition to advance in the budget for 2019 that will reflect this new fiscal path. In that sense, I think it's very important that sometimes the contradictory news that may come from Argentina shouldn't take us to wrong conclusions. It's clear that the Peronist, the more rational part of the Peronism that has been very supportive of many reforms we have done and a lot of agreements we have been able to do for structural policies, it's also clear that they are opposition, and we understand that we are not governing together, and they have a different role than we have in that sense, and that we can have differences like we had in recent weeks with the tariff law, but also at the same time that in the House of Representatives the tariff law was being voted, a new capital market law and a new antitrust law were being voted. And the same day the Senate voted the tariff law, the executive decree modifying 170 laws for debureaucratization and promoting investment was being voted also. And both things are part of the reality of contradictions that I think is everywhere in politics today and probably will be part of the political scenario. But we are confident that we are going to keep on working in terms of getting those agreements necessary for making our path of development sustainable and predictable for the future. And we also think it's very important, because many people asked us, and I think after the third day being in the road, after being a couple of days in London, I can imagine some of the questions. We are very confident that the agreement with the IMF and the new situation we are in will not compromise our capability of winning next year's election. Because many times in the analysis of what's happening in Argentina, people forget that our political system is not similar in a way to Europe or the United States or other places, although the debate on those countries is also getting broader. But in our country, it's very broad. And the disagreements we have are much more structural. And we are very confident, and the polls show it, and the day by day show it, that the majority of Argentines that decided to change only look to one direction, and that is forward. And there is no intention of going back to that country we left behind in 2015. Only a minority thinks that that is the path to go. And that Cambiemos is the main and principal alternative of future in Argentina. And so we are confident that we can get the possibility of advancing in that new fiscal path with the agreement with IMF and have a year 2019 of growth, a year of growth and job creation that could be important, but it's not the only factor when we think about elections. It's political change, democratic, peaceful political change is still the name of the story in Argentina. And I think that's very important when you see the volatility, the possibility of conflicts. Obviously, everywhere there are conflicts, and we are not the exception. But that shouldn't, I think, alter the center part of the story. And the third part, to finish the introduction, is that the reforms are continuing to advance. All the news about the volatility or the doubts shouldn't confuse us in terms of what's happening in the day by day in our country. The government is advancing in its plan of government with the 100 objectives, advancing at the same time. Some go faster, some go slower, but they are all advancing. Our infrastructure plan is advancing, and we were just a couple of weeks ago, in the middle of the doubts also, and the volatility, we advanced in the first bid of PPP very successfully, and we are continuing with several more in the few months. We are advancing in debureaucratization of our economy, advancing in sectoral reforms, working not only the government, but also the government with private sector and unions, in working permanently in trying to see how we can remove obstacles for job creation, for investment, for more competitive economy. We are working permanently also in our global agenda, leading G20 today, leading a G20 where we still think, and we have shown in the past months, as the same as the WTO meeting in December in Buenos Aires, that there is a space for dialogue, for consensus, and for a country like ours hosting with a spirit of honest broker to the different parts of the world that may have differences, conflicts, or debates. We can be an actor that can help promote those consensus, promote trying to find the common ground, but especially to ratify our conviction that multilateralism and dialogue and rule-oriented world is a better world than a world where there's more conflicts and there's more differences. And that intelligent insertion in the world is something that is continuing and is part of a permanent transformation we are living, a transformation that is something that will not rule out challenges, will not rule out situations that we can't manage because they come from outside, or mistakes that we have to correct and that we have to try to do, to learn from the lessons and try to do things better. But the transformation, again, is driven by the heart of the Argentines. And it's really moving, if you go to Argentina, not only what happens in the few blocks of the center of the city of Buenos Aires and its stories, but you go to the interior of the country and you see the infrastructure advancing, you see the tourism advancing, you see the connectivity plans, you see the new jobs, the new ideas, and especially the new energy of a country that is thinking of the future, is thinking of that possibility of reaching that, or breaching or reducing that distance between the country we are and the country we can and will be. And so we hope that every month that continues to advance and every year we continue to advance, we add stories of success of companies that open in our country, investments that come to our country and say, as we had meetings today with several, we are happy to be there. We are happy to see the talent, the creativity, the energy, the opportunities that are in Argentina. And so we can look to the past challenges and see how at least we can put an example on the table of how peaceful and democratic change after a populism can be a success story. Thank you very much.
Speech. Questions? We have microphones. Can you just identify yourself, please?
Mauro Leos from Moody's.
Yes.
One could say that
Wait, we need this microphone, guys, because
Yes.
Mauro Leos from. Hello. Well, you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Mauro Leos from Moody's. One could say that when we think of the approach of the Macri administration towards economic policy, that can be summarized in one word: gradualism. What's your reply to those that argue that, you know, the events that we have seen show that gradualism didn't work, that it doesn't work in Argentina?
First, to define gradualism, which is a synonym in our case to pragmatism. When you find the extremes, you understand the path we're going. The extremes are saying we should reduce all our fiscal problem in one moment. We think that that's not a good idea because it's not sustainable socially, it's not sustainable economically, and it's not sustainable politically. So independently if it's a success story anywhere, no? to try to reduce a big problem like we had in a structural disaster as we received, in a way, from one day to the other. On the other side are those that say fiscal deficit's not a problem. It's all a neoliberal invention. It's something that economy is a matter of political will. And so we have to show that you can transform reality from your political decision. And that leads us to Venezuela as an example of what happens in a country that goes that way. It's a way, we believe, it's a dishonest way. It's a short-term lie that at the end ends up in a bad path. And we were going that direction. So gradualism is everything in the middle of that. It's a possible path towards fiscal balance, growing and taking care of the most vulnerable parts of society at the same time. What has changed? And first, we feel it's very successful. We have been growing for the past 7 quarters. This quarter, obviously, we were very affected by the drought in our country, and that combined with the currency crisis will have a temporary setback, but we are confident that this is going on the right direction. We have reduced, when we arrived in power, 42% of public spending on GDP. We are now in 38 by the end of this year, plus 2 points less of taxes. So it's probably, or certainly, the biggest fiscal effort made in our country in a century, and we did it growing and with public support, winning the midterm elections. So we think that our path is a successful path, but we have to change speeds. We have to go a little bit faster. That's the biggest adjustment we have to do. We understand, as we said before, that we are in a new context, and we have very little margin of error. And we understand also that we have to be very careful about everything we do, because when these crises approach, we are not only debating these 2.5 years, but the past 70, 80 years of our country. And we understand that, and we are facing that with decision and conviction.
Back there, we have a question, and then we'll come here.
Thank you for the presentation, Marcos. This is Juan Navarro-Staikos from Lord Abbott. So you talked about accelerating the need for the fiscal consolidation, and that makes sense given the market environment. But as you've cut a lot of the inefficient spending that you can control, like around the economic subsidies, there's not much left to cut that doesn't require legislative approval outside of something like CapEx, which obviously a big part of your electoral success has been that Macri gets things done, that he builds things. He's built roads, railroads. He's updated the dilapidated infrastructure. But as you think about accelerating the fiscal consolidation, is there a risk that you have to cut CapEx so much that it starts to affect that success that you've had around the politics and around the infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you. No, for us it's crucial not to affect the infrastructure project, but that's why next year most of the infrastructure investment will come from PPP. So it will reduce pressure on the Treasury. We will be able to speed up the investment, which is not only important in terms of electorate ways, but it's also very important in terms of getting better competitivity for our economy. And we think that that's something that goes together, and also the job creation and the possibilities of generating investment. We think that the possibility or the challenge we have for next year's budget that goes along with a whole lot of measures and agreements we have had in the past 2.5 years in terms of getting a better fiscal policy, a better federalism with our provinces. When we arrived in power, almost half, I think, of the provinces didn't have the money to pay the December salaries when we arrived in December. Next year, almost all of the provinces will gonna have surplus in their budget. And that's because we have worked with them and will have also tax reform to lower tax. We think that the agreement we have to work nationally for the budget is an agreement first debating priorities and then debating also the cuts, because the national budget still has a lot of problems in terms of why the national state is doing some things, why the provincial governments are doing some things. We need to reorganize a little bit our federalism, what the national government puts as priorities, and the efficiency of expenditure. So we think that there is a possible way. We are working on it, and again, as soon as we have the agreement with the IMF, we'll be very clear about the target and how we think we can reach that objective.
Right over here, there's a question.
Hi, Marcos.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm Pedro Silveira, the managing partner of XP Investimentos from Brazil, one of the largest broker-dealers there. And, well, we are rooting so much for Argentina to get back on track as affects the world region.
I thought it was in the World Cup. I was
No,
surprised.
no.
Rooting for Argentina in the World Cup, but
You know
I
my
was going to thank you.
You know my position
moving.
on that, so anyway. But I have two questions for you. I'll get it together. One is, you mentioned the hearts of the Argentinas and everything, the transformation. But in a practical effect, which sectors of the economy you see driving the growth for the next 2 years, this year and next year? And also in this new scenario of probably a different growth expected and the devaluation of the currency, how you see the current account deficit moving forward? Thanks so much.
Thanks. First, one of the answers is tied to both questions. Is the agricultural sector has been one of the main drivers, one of the first that started with the investment. The extension and the deepness of the drought this year really was very hard on us for an economy and also for our current account. And we think that unless, let's hope not, we have once in a lifetime situation of 2 droughts in a row, next year we'll have a very, very strong crop, and it's going to be very important in terms of current account also. I think it's about 10 billion but I don't know exactly the number that's estimated, but it's very strong as for next year. Infrastructure is another very important motive of growth. Energy is another factor, is very important. Vaca Muerta is starting to take speed, and that's very important for us. It is the same as renewables. Tourism is growing very strongly and very interesting. We think probably it's going to be in soon, probably one of the main sectors pushing our economy. It goes very much in hand with the connectivity revolution we're doing in terms of flights. We're the 8th largest country in the world, but per capita we were one with the less flights, and it's growing exponentially, and that is doing a virtuous circle in all the activities. Construction in general, not only because of infrastructure, but also because of private investment and mortgage loans that are starting very strongly in Argentina today. Credit and capital markets is also something, well, so it's really hard to say a sector that is not have a huge opportunity of growth. And that's why altogether we think that investment is going to be healthy and pushing growth in our country. And that contributes in a way, the devaluation, the situation of the agro are both going to contribute to the current account. But also we are very clear in the diagnosis, and sometimes some people agree, some not. But our main challenge is the fiscal balance, because the private sector is balanced in its current account. It's a problem that we have until we reach that fiscal balance, that we will have more exposition to those situations.
Hi, thank you, Marcos, for spending the time today with us. You were abroad for the last few days talking to people on the capital markets and on many other topics. One question that I had is, as we see in Europe and also across Latin America, the emergence of people on the political landscape that might not be that might be leaning a little bit towards the populist side, if you will, or anti-establishment, and we've seen that across a number of countries, both in Europe and with elections in a number of countries in Latin America in the next few months. What are the messages that you take home as you're going back home now in terms of what has happened the last few weeks in Argentina, the last few months, in terms of the work that you're doing to work with the opposition, but also within this more global phenomenon that you're seeing, and how do you see that changed, if it changed over the last few weeks, given what happened in terms of the
Okay, I would go from more general to more particular. We strongly believe that we are facing a time where democracy has a big challenge in terms of adapting to a society that has changed more than its institutions has changed, and that its political offer has changed. The acceleration of change in our societies in terms of globalization, in terms of technology, in terms of empowerment for people, bring a challenge to us all. In that context, I think that sometimes public debate in the world misses a little bit the perspective of each country. It's not the same debating about a more populist or anti-system offer in a country where you have strong institutions than where you don't have institutions. It's not the same debating about protectionism in a very open economy than in a very closed economy. It's not the same debating about corporate incentives or promoting investment in a country where you have strong state dependence, or those that you have more dynamic private sector. And in that sense, the first alert we give is it is compatible that a country that is very close to the world, as we are in matter of trade, is looking to open at the same time where very open economies are trying to close. It's not contradictory because we are debating from different parts. That said, I think that what we can offer in a way, in terms of our experience, a long, vast experience of failures and deceptions and short-term views, or listening to the siren call of populism, is that it's not a good idea. Believe us, it's not the path. We think that the path goes through democracy, through dialogues, through consensus, through rule-oriented society, for more openness, for more exchange, especially for an emerging country like ours, but I think in general, we have a positive perspective about globalization. We have a positive perspective about the things that have happened to the world, independently that we understand that every new situation brings new challenges, but always in the story of humanity there have been challenges. But never looking back is the best way to go forward. And we have had a century of experience of governing ourselves, going back to a past that we lost. And that's why we're working so hard and going forward. And what we have received in the political side or in the economical side is a lot of support, a lot of people rooting for us, for giving us support in terms of the possibility of helping a story that's inspiring. That's not Macri's story, it's not Cambiemos' story, it's the Argentine story. Because that's, I think, is what moves a lot of people, especially people that travel to Argentina to see what's happening. It's a story that is inspiring. And obviously, I think that everybody wanted to hear if we were listening to the situation and reacting accordingly or not. And I think that everybody has seen clearly that we are and hoping to move forward.
Thank you so much for your comments, Siobhan Morden from Nueva. Just one quick comment. I think it's fair to say that, except for the obstructionist opposition, everyone wants to see the Macri administration succeed. So you have, I think everyone here has solidarity with you and your team.
Thank you.
Two quick questions. In terms of the LEBAC rollover risk, could you just briefly go through what your plans are to reduce that rollover risk? And number two, could you provide any context for increasing the China swap line or plans to do so? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, on the first matter, our finance ministry and the central bank are working on scenarios and plans to reduce that vulnerability. And as soon as the decisions are made, especially by the central bank, they will be communicated. But we register that that's a situation that is offering some vulnerability that we should reduce. The second aspect, Argentina has a strategic alliance with China. We have been working together in a lot of projects, and as part of, as we said before, an intelligent insertion to the world that permits us have excellent relationships to every country possible. And the relationship between Argentina and China goes back and has been very fruitful in a lot of things, in matter of trade, in matter of investment and cooperation. And in that aspect, there was a swap before, and there are talks, not too much to confirm that. We are having talks to see if there's possibility of extending that swap in the current situation. But again, as soon as the whole program is closed, Minister Duhovne will communicate it as with a full detail.
Marcos, Pablo Gover from BlackRock. You're talking about the slippery slope between sort of the adjustment and the political consistency of the plan. I mean, every time you adjust, there's somebody that gets hurt, right? And so I want to talk you to talk a little bit more about sort of the willingness is clear of adjustment, the ability, given sort of the political scenario that is presented going forward. How you think that the fairness of the adjustment so far, how you have distributed this adjustment so far, and how you're going to be distributing this adjustment going forward. And here, talk a little bit about reality and perception and the messaging around it, because I think that it's very different, and particularly how you convince some people that feel they're getting a more unfavorable touch in this adjustment, thinking about the 2019 elections.
Well, first, that's why I said before. First, the slippery slope is more a matter of confidence than a matter of policy, because obviously, when you have a track record like ours, and you have the challenge of changing the energy of the country from looking behind to looking forward, there's a lot of convincing and persuasion and subjective feelings in that sense, no? And the same, either for an investor or for a foreign country that has to think why this time is different in Argentina, or a voter in a neighborhood in Buenos Aires or in some province of the country saying why this time is different. And in that sense, for us, it has been always very important for this idea of correcting and adjusting our disbalances in our economy, trying to grow at the same time. because in that sense, it's not the same as a contraction, a normal contraction of a other type of economy. And there's a huge space for growing because there's a huge space for investment and the possibility of modifying your rules and your institutions so you can have that huge potential that has been still not unleashed fully in our country as a vehicle for growth. And so when President Macri in 30th of October of the past year, we won the election, and 2 or 3 days afterwards called all the leaders of the country, of the different sectors, and said we have to find at least 3 basic consensus. One consensus about fiscal responsibility, one consensus about job creation by the private sector, and one consensus also about the quality of our institutions and the importance of understanding that the long-term trust for our country will not come by trusting Macri or his team, but by trusting the institutions he built. Said that, we advanced in a lot of things. We advanced and we have done a lot of the hardest work already, especially after 2016, which was a strong recession and a strong impact on the population. And I think here the most important thing is the strength and the maturity of the Argentine society that has done a huge effort, especially in the largest efforts that were across the board, but obviously impacted those especially middle class or lower middle class sectors, normalizing tariffs, for example. Well, slowly they're starting to see that now there's credit for buying a house, or that they can travel by airplane before they didn't travel, or there's a new infrastructure project in their neighborhood, or they see that that continues, that positive stories is happening. There was a lot of fear also in the past month. The idea of, well, is this effort worthwhile, or are we going to fail again? No? And that's why I think it's very important to put the message of Macri's leadership in terms of speaking clearly to the people, not lying to them, saying these are the efforts we have to make, these are the challenges. And that's when the political challenge comes, to build a consensus, to traduce that into a budget, and to traduce that into the reforms we have to do. And we find that there's a majority in the political system that wants to support that. And again, as any debate of any budget in anywhere in the world, there will be fights and debates and advances, and probably we'll get to a compromise in the middle ground. But we are optimistic. Again, we think our optimism is not based on a voluntary view or a voluntaristic view, but if you think, and Susan is a witness of that, and many of you are, where we were 3 years ago and where we are now, we've passed tougher challenges than what we have in the future, and we're convinced that we can do it.
The last question goes right here.
Thank you for being here. My name is Ben Tedium with Johnson & Johnson. You mentioned the G20. I believe it's a great opportunity for Argentina to show its leadership on a world stage and not just talk about domestic issues, but international ones as well. Certainly, one issue that affects every country within the G20 is the sustainability of health systems. Being from the private sector, we've had good engagement in Germany and look forward to good engagement in Japan as well. I know there was a request for private sector engagement through the G20 at the October 3rd Health Ministers meeting. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Argentina can engage with the international private sector on issues like healthcare and others.
Well, the 3 main objectives of this G20 that we put ourselves under the claim of building consensus for a fair and sustainable development, with the idea of trying to put out perspective. It's the first G20 that's done in South America, and we think that the agenda and that we could put on the table should be different maybe than in Germany or in China or in other countries that offer their own perspective. We put 3 main pillars of work. One is financing for infrastructure. The second one is education and the new jobs that we are going to have in the future or in the present moment. And third, the situation of food and production and exchange and food security. And those debates, I think, are helping in a way, or being very productive, to especially, again, to put a proposal of methodology what we can do, as we always say, G20 presidency is not presidency of the world. We can't demand the G20. And there are other institutions that have main mandate for several things. But what we can do is offer a setting and a way of working where private sector, civil society, public sector of the different countries can work on the different aspects. And health is one example of that. There's something that we wanted to keep on in the agenda. We have worked especially with the British government that had a very important role in that sense. So what we can offer, as we say, is a good setting for the debate and trying to have a dynamic that in every meeting there can be something productive in terms of finding common ground. I think that that's our main contribution at the G20, and hopefully at the end, the G20 summit can be an example for that. We're going to work, and we are working today very intensively. Our president is going to the G7 meeting as invited by the president of G7, Trudeau. No, not to assist to the whole meeting, but he will try to speak of this agenda, of how to integrate the agenda of G20 and G7, and hopefully we can have good results.
So with that, Marcos, I would like to thank you very much for being here today. Muchas gracias. I think that you have spoken words that are very important to the global investors about the path for Argentina. And I don't think there's anyone in this room that wouldn't wish you a great deal of luck and success and wouldn't believe that they have a great deal of confidence in the institutions that you're trying to, and President Macri are trying to build. I think we all agree that that's the key. Thank you so much for being here, and good luck.
Thank you very much.